Hello everyone, Nathan P. Butler here, and this is another of our sort of Star Wars ranking videos here on the channel. Folks have been asking for more content, have been asking a lot of times for my opinions and rankings of, say, things like the Star Wars films. So after having done some top whatever lists from the Star Wars home video library, I decided to also branch out and do some of those types of things for just sort of general Star Wars stuff. We already did a ranking back in, I think it was September of this year, so a couple of months ago, of the 12 Star Wars theatrical films, 11 live action plus the Clone Wars as well, so be sure to check that out. Give your opinions in the comments of what your rankings would be and so forth. In this episode, we're going to be doing something similar, except this time we are looking at the Star Wars animated TV series and ranking all of them. And for what it's worth, when I say animated series, we are not going to include Lego. Lego gets its own list. And we're only talking about things that would be considered sort of TV series in general. So stuff like Galaxy of Adventures, to my mind, wouldn't count for something like this, being sort of a YouTube type series. Forces of Destiny would count because it did air on television as those collected episodes and so on. Your definitions and what should or shouldn't even count on such a list will vary, as will opinions probably on the ranking order. As always, these are just my opinions. If you get offended by opinion, you probably shouldn't be watching videos like these. If you want to share your opinion and engage in some discussion, civil discussion, feel free to give some information in the comments about what your rankings would be and why. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Again, it's opinion. That's kind of what the point of an opinion thing is. So we're going to be ranking here 10 non-Lego Star Wars animated TV specials. And we want to start out with sort of an honorable mention here for number 11, something I don't think really belongs on the list because it was not a series in and of itself, and that is the cartoon by Nelvana Limited from the Star Wars Holiday Special. So call it honorable mention. It's there. It gave us the introduction to Boba Fett. It otherwise generally wasn't great, and it was part of a special that really pretty much was garbage. I will say, though, if you ever want to see Star Wars as drawn in a trippy 1970s way, be sure to check out the Star Wars Holiday Specials cartoon, The Faithful Wookiee. You can find it now on Disney+. You can also find it as bonus features on some of the Blu-ray releases of The Empire Strikes Back. Saga on Home Video, my book, gives details on where to find stuff if you happen to be looking for that sort of thing. But suffice to say, that is not included because it wasn't really a series, by my mind, that doesn't belong on the list, but it does get an honorable mention because it was the first. Wasn't great. Everybody kind of looks like they're made out of mashed potatoes, but it worked. So, starting out here at number 10, the one that would be ranked lower if there was just more stuff on the list to make it even lower than just number 10, and that is the Ewoks. The horrible children of the forest moon. The Ewoks cartoon series, for a long time, it's funny because for a long time, you can almost sort of falsely remember it as better than it was because the second season wasn't available to watch anywhere. Now it's all on Disney+, everybody can see how completely horrid the second season became. It's a series that is Star Wars in name only. In almost every instance, with the exception of like one or two episodes, one in particular, it really doesn't feel Star Wars at all. And the characters don't really feel like they're Star Wars selves at all from the films or from the Ewok telemovies. They're just kind of there. If they had changed the names to the characters and changed their headdresses to look a little bit differently, you would never have known that this was a Star Wars series. And the characters are all right. What gets me most is the way they changed the format in Season 2. Season 1 was okay, kiddie, but it was a kid's cartoon. That's kind of the point. It's made by the same people that made Care Bears. But then you get to the second season, and the series is completely retooled, visually and in terms of characterization and in terms of format. A lot of episodes, the vast majority of episodes, wind up instead of having a single 20-minute episode, basically once you take out commercials, 20-minute story per episode, instead now has basically two stories that are half-length that are even less sensical and even more rushed than just a regular episode. They've changed the opening theme, so the Ewoks is iconic. Grating, but iconic. It's just a very generic what's funny is it actually does sort of fit with Yub Nub in its bouncy theme, it just didn't really work as well, or it become as iconic in terms of themes for Ewoks. But I mean, they completely changed the characters. You know, you had the instance in the original where you had, you know, gosh, what was it? It was like Latara was Gaga over Tebow in season 1, but he was this oblivious sorcerer's apprentice who didn't realize she had affection for him. And in season 2, he's Gaga over her to the point of his heart beating out of his chest, Looney Tunes style. And she's just this manipulative little shit who's constantly messing with him because of her knowing how he feels for her. Wicket, I guess, becomes a teenager because his attitude completely changes between seasons. Certain characters disappear forever. Season 2 was just a mess, except for the one episode that actually tied in the Empire. So yeah, not a great series, kind of Star Wars in name only for the most part. Definitely not one that I have a lot of fun rewatching, unless I'm rewatching it with friends, like when we did that series for Republic Forces Radio Network way back in the day, the old podcast I was a part of, when we did an entire retrospective on the Ewoks stuff. So it's on Disney Plus. You've been warned. All the physical home video releases have been from season 1, so still not feeling very Star Wars, but at least not the horrid season 2 stuff once you get there. At least as far as the US goes. The UK and some other places did get some season 2 stuff on home video, but that's a whole separate series because this actually isn't from the Star Wars home video library this time. So we move on to number 9. And number 9 for me is there because it is kind of pointless. And that is Forces of Destiny. Whether you watch it as the individual episodes, those very short episodes online or on television, or you watch those collected volumes. And if you do like the collected volumes, my Patreon, patreon.com/NathanPButler, has audio commentaries for every one of those 4 collected editions of Forces of Destiny. It's just a series that didn't need to exist. The shorts are pointless. There's little to no actual impact on anything. I think the one time there's an impact on really much of anything is, hey, here's how Leia gets the Boushh costume that she could then use in Return of the Jedi. There's very, very, very little there. Some of the voice work is pretty cool, but some of the episodes are just flat out dumb. Most of them are fluff. Some of them are dumb. Does not make for a great series. And it really sucks because that was a series that was supposed to sort of put female characters at the forefront and really kind of push this new product line aimed more towards girls. Now, say what you will about whether a franchise needs to be differentiated by sex or differentiated by gender identity, representation does matter. And it was kind of cool to see female characters taking the forefront, but they really did a disservice to those characters. We're going to do this great thing and show strong female characters in Star Wars in their own highlighted stories. And we're going to make them small, we're going to make them suck, we're going to make some of them nonsensical, and they're not going to be all that interesting or valid or useful or anything, and the product line is going to go down the toilet. Girl power? I don't know. It was really kind of an initiative that didn't go as well as it probably should have. Given the emotional force they were trying to put behind it. And Forces of Destiny wound up just kind of being a forgettable series. That brings us to number 8, which is going to wrap up the 1980s for us, because this is Droids. The Droids series felt much more Star Wars than Ewoks did, by far. I also can applaud the Droids series, because the Droids series, it told its stories as arcs. They weren't self-contained individual episodes, which most cartoons at the time were doing. Instead, you had basically 3 different 4-episode arcs. One episode that was kind of like a tie-in between, and then a TV special that tied in between in another little section. That made for a sense of continuity in that series. Gave us different rotating supporting casts each arc, essentially each arc. Which made it something that could focus on R2 and 3PO, but also have these other characters that could have their own dynamics, their own relationships, their own adventures, which was kind of cool. It was still kind of goofy. Some of the goofier elements have actually been removed for the collected editions that came later when they took 4 episodes each and combined them into sort of film-style versions like they did with Ewoks as well twice for both. But generally speaking, more Star Wars seeming, more instances of the Empire playing a role, more sort of the seedy underworld type thing that we eventually got with like The Mandalorian, and that we got with a lot of the scum and villainy type aspects of Star Wars, Return of the Jedi with Jabba and so on. So to me, it was just a better series than Ewoks. Now, granted, that doesn't mean a whole lot that it was a better series than Ewoks, because Ewoks sucked. But at least it was better than Ewoks, and because of the nature and the Legends continuity, at least, of those characters, of the development of R2 and 3PO through those owners and how that was later worked into the broader story of those characters, that actually worked better for me than Forces of Destiny, because those stories seem to have more oomph to them. A 4-episode arc, even of a kiddie series, is going to have more depth to it than like a 2 or 3 minute or whatever it is episode, even if they're strung together a couple episodes at a time of Forces of Destiny. They're just kind of quick in, quick out. At least, typically, that would be the case just because of the format, though we will see that doesn't always necessarily hold true. So for me, number 8 was Droids. Number 7 is going to be one that also includes, like Droids, some characters with weird proportions who tend to move very goofily, in this case, like Goofy, the Disney character when running, that just didn't do it for me. Had story arcs like Droids did, but story arcs that didn't really grab me as much as it probably should have. And that is Disney's own Star Wars Resistance, which aired for 2 seasons, only one of which ever got a home video release, but all of which are available digitally on Disney Plus as well. Resistance, I think Resistance suffered for when it was being made. It was a story that leads up into The Force Awakens, but was released primarily afterwards. I think all afterwards, but primarily, I forget the dates. And then is able to lead up into and past Last Jedi, which makes sense because Last Jedi is, immediately following Force Awakens. In fact, there's some overlap. But then it never gets a chance to get as far as Rise of Skywalker. And it's an interesting cast of characters, some pretty interesting twists and turns along the way. Great voice acting. The comedic relief character in that series, relative to someone like Jar Jar in other series, actually worked for me. Niku was hilarious to me most of the time. Even when it was sort of kiddie humor, because it was sort of a refined kiddie humor? I don't even know what you would call it. It wasn't fart jokes all the time. But it's just a series that it was a little bit exaggerated in its art style, as most of them were. And just because of its setting, because of the characters, it felt natural when they did work into other storylines, but it just kind of felt like meh to me. It never really grabbed me the way that the other flagship animated Star Wars series have. So for that, Resistance winds up being sort of a blip on the radar, so to speak. Maybe like racer ships blipping on the radar or something. But yeah, sorry, Resistance. It didn't work as well as it should have. That brings us to number 6, which for me is the other short form series that actually did work a bit better, which is Clone Wars. Not the Clone Wars, but Clone Wars, the Genndy Tartakovsky series, also known as the 2D micro series or the micro series. Short stuff by Genndy Tartakovsky, 25 episodes, varying lengths. The last 5 were longer than the previous 20. They could be run together, basically, and eventually gave us what we think of as volumes 1 and 2 on DVD and elsewhere. Cool art style, very stylized, had some goofy moments, but like here, let's zoom towards something on a speeder with a pike, and somehow by driving past a tank or a walker, it explodes. What? And did you know that when Dirge explodes, inside is basically sausage gristle and Twizzlers? The thing about Clone Wars microseries, though, is that it did give us a coherent serialized storyline for the most part, and did give us a lot of cool visuals to go with, even though they were kind of exaggerated in a Looney Tunes sort of way. Like there's no way the characters survive this sort of moments, even more so than the Clone Wars did. But thinking back on it, most people think of like the Battle of Munilist from it, but to me it was all about the battle on Yavin 4 between Ventress and Anakin. It was fantastic. It did get kind of a bad rap, though, in the latter episodes, because at the same time it was being produced, when the Legends continuity was the Star Wars continuity, it was being produced, as was Labyrinth of Evil, as was Reversal of Fortune, the web strip, and you found that all these different interpretations of what was happening with Anakin and Obi-Wan immediately before Revenge of the Sith, and what was happening on Coruscant with Palpatine and Grievous immediately before Revenge of the Sith, didn't actually match up the way that they were supposed to, which made for some really piss-poor continuity in that little chunk of time right before Episode 3. So it kind of took a hit from that. Looking back on it now, still kind of takes a hit from that because it is not part of canon, where it would just clash again with Siege of Mandalore. But it worked well enough for the time. It was a fun thing. I remember, making sure to watch each episode, enjoying it as it went, and so on out there. So I will say Clone Wars Micro Series, for me, caps out the bottom half of this top 10. That brings us into the top 5. And number 5 is going to be one that I will be recording commentaries for sometime in the near future, which is Visions, or at least Visions Season or Volume 1. Star Wars Visions, I'm actually kind of surprised when I was looking at this that it wound up as high on this list as it does, because Ewoks, Droids, and Clone Wars are all part of the Legends continuity. Forces of Destiny and Resistance are all part of canon, the new current story group canon. I guess I say new, but going almost a decade now. Visions isn't either. Visions is kind of its own thing. The only one that even really has much continuity at this point at all is the first episode that has a novel, Ronin, and has a comic that's like a prequel to it that all kind of go together. Usually standalone stories don't do it for me. But these are standalone stories that have really cool styles that didn't try to pretend to matter. They just were their own thing. And were their own thing in a way that explored an artistic style that I've really liked to see in print with manga Star Wars stories, actually being given an anime version of that, which fits perfectly in with the influences of Lucas himself and people like Doug Chiang and others, looking to Japanese art styles and visual media styles when trying to look for influences for new Star Wars ships and stuff like that, or new Star Wars stories and so on, Kurosawa and all that. So to me, I thought it was actually pretty fun, though I'm not a big fan of anime in general. I'm a fan of some, but not a whole lot. So when I record commentaries for those sometime soon for Patreon, that'll be an interesting thing. It's patreon.com/Nathan P. Butler. But basically, I'm going to be doing commentaries for Series 1, just like I did for Forces of Destiny, all 4 volumes of that. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but along with those Republic Forces Radio Network episodes we did on Ewoks, we also did do the entirety of Droids. I don't know if those episodes are still available out there anywhere. It used to be republicforces.com. Yeah. So that brings us to number 4 for me, which is the newest on the list. And that is Tales of the Jedi. I despise the fact that they took the name of one of my favorite Legends comic series and applied it to this series. I think that was an idiotic move. It's only going to cause confusion, and it caused a lot of disappointment, because as soon as we saw that logo showing up places, there was a lot of hype around, oh my god, they're doing Tales of the Jedi, and then it turned out not to even remotely be about anything at all related to the old Tales of the Jedi stuff, even in its era. It was basically new short episodes that are tie-ins to the Clone Wars. A solid series, a fun series, some cool background, particularly on Dooku that we got there. A little bit for Ahsoka, but mostly the Dooku episodes stood out to me. And very well done for as quick as they were. The first episode, for me, but those types of stories never do get me, that style of storytelling. But the other ones really kind of stood out to me. It was cool to see the development of Dooku fairly quickly. Cool to see a bit of Ahsoka's development in terms of how she dealt with, how she learned the skills that would eventually save her during Order 66. Though I will say that the fact that the last episode basically put another nail in the coffin of the Ahsoka novelization by redoing a big chunk of the Ahsoka novelization, as Siege of Mandalore did, because of film taking precedence and all that, and being yet another thing to remind us that even though they say it's all an equal level of canon, it's really not. It's a tiered system. By definition, if every time there's a conflict, you give priority to, TV and movies, yes, it's a tiered system. Yes, books and comics are below that, regardless of what is said, just in terms of practical sense. But it was a fun series to see. If I could turn off my continuity mind and just enjoy the Ahsoka arc for what it is, the way that I needed to do that for Siege of Mandalore, and really enjoy both, and just assume that the Ahsoka novelization is just kind of in tatters, or not novelization, the Ahsoka novel is just in tatters right now, pretty much. You can go with it, and I did enjoy that. Do I want to see more of Tales of the Jedi? Not particularly, but I wouldn't be adverse to it or anything. It's not something I'm chomping at the bit for or anything like that. Or champing, not chomping, champing at the bit for or anything like that. Which brings us to the big three, the top three, right? Three. That wasn't going to work out. So maybe I was going to do this. Yeah, there you go. I was screwing up. Number 3 is going to be the one that is the newest of the final 3, and is a spin-off of one of the others in the final 3, which is The Bad Batch. Now, we've only got one season of Bad Batch so far, and so far what I've seen has been interesting. I'm not terribly invested in the characters themselves. They still feel like these are characters that were created for the Bad Batch episode of the Clone Wars, or episodes of the Clone Wars, almost like based on video game archetypes. Here's the tank, here's the tech guy, here's the sniper, and so on and so on. But they've done some cool things in the era immediately after Revenge of the Sith. They've managed to bring in some existing characters and show us what happens with them. Gave us a little bit more origin for Hera, while at the same time giving us sort of an epilogue for the rest of the Syndulla family, sort of bridging together Clone Wars and Rebels a bit with that. I look forward to seeing where they go next in showing us this early development of the Empire in an actual Imperial era, not just the Republic leaning towards the Empire. So a fun series. I will say that it doesn't stand up to the other two that are my top 2 by quite a bit, but pretty solid little series here. I'm looking forward to season 2 sometime soon. Then we have number 2, and there's only 2 big ones left, right? So the question here is, which one is going to get to stand out? Those who know me will have no question which one is going to be number 1 and which one here is going to be number 2. My number 2 is the Clone Wars. And it's for a couple of reasons. The Clone Wars, one thing about the Clone Wars to me is that in the end, it was amazing. The Siege of Mandalore arc is some of the most awesome Star Wars storytelling put to screen. It is fantastic. And a lot of the stuff that comes in like season 5, season 6, a lot of the stuff that comes once we do the time jump and so on was really gripping, interesting stuff. The fact that they sort of took eventually a mini-movie approach where every few episodes was an arc that gave us kind of a cool Star Wars cinematic experience. That was great. The artistic style and the quality of the animation kept getting better and better and better. The vocal performances were fantastic throughout. But that first, 2.5 seasons, ouch. This was a series that took a long time to find its footing. The original animation style was not great. The original storytelling style was especially with the jumbled order of the stories as in terms of when they were released versus the actual chronological order of them. Ahsoka, when first introduced, was annoying as hell. It took a while for her to mature into the character that we then came to love as one of the major characters of this era of Star Wars. But originally, pretty annoying. It was a very clunky series. As amazing and streamlined and refined as the later episodes, especially Siege of Mandalore, were, that are so cinematic and just emotionally gripping. The opposite is basically true of pretty much the entirety of the first couple seasons of the Clone Wars. They fall flat in a lot of ways. It is a chore when going through and watching the Clone Wars over again, which I recently have done over the last 5 years or so, because yes, I've done Patreon commentaries now. I've recorded commentaries for every single episode of the Clone Wars, with the last few being released between now and April 1st. But boy, rewatching some of those can be a real drag. And there's a huge quality difference from beginning to end. So because of that unevenness, because it was their growing pains, and those first couple of seasons were pretty freaking rough, Clone Wars only manages to land number 2 on my list, despite some amazing work, particularly the Darth Maul work of Sam Witwer later in the series. Which means my number one can only be the one that those who know me well would have already guessed, which is Rebels. It didn't run as long as Clone Wars, 7 seasons for Clone Wars versus just 4 for Rebels, but they seem to have really had a knack for episodic, serialized, what I'm looking for serialized storytelling that sometimes felt episodic, and even those episodes actually turned out to have something connected to later, like Fight or Flight, for instance. A great serialized storyline, great character development, a really interesting close-knit group of characters, and a real sense of peril and what could happen next, because the cast was not made up primarily of characters whose fates we already knew, right? Of the core characters from the Clone Wars, it was really just Rex and Ahsoka, where we really didn't know what was going to happen to them. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, most of the rest of the Jedi, we knew what was going to happen to them. Here, whole new playing ground with these characters, and we got to see the development of the early rebellion. We got some cool cameos that actually made sense to be there, like Mon Mothma, like Saw Gerrera, and it gives a great lead-in to eventually get us to Rogue One. The ending episodes of that series especially, very, very emotional stuff. So to me, in terms of storytelling, to some degree in terms of the art style being a little bit more refined and consistent throughout, and just the gravitas of the story they were telling, to me, Rebels as a whole, as a 4-season series, as opposed to, say, Clone Wars with its 7, because of its consistency and quality throughout, it really went for quality over quantity and wins out, for me, as my number one animated Star Wars television series. So you know what my top 10 were at this point. I'd be curious what your ranking of the 10 would be. If you put those in the comments below, curious where you agree, disagree, and so on as we go. Are there any that I left out? I don't think I left out any that would have fit my own reasoning of what goes on the list versus what shouldn't be on the list, like Galaxy of Adventures, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. And we'll be back with another one of these very soon, looking at my rankings of the live-action Star Wars series. We'll be taking it season by season. Catch you next time. May the Force be with you, and thanks for watching.